So I think we only may have played one jail call or jail visit for you, and this is the one where Isabella comes to visit her mother on April 8th of 2018. And of course, Isabella has no idea what ride or die means or what it relates to. But in this case, I wanted to point out to you that you have the defendant who's written in ink ride or die on the back of her neck. And knowing now that ride or die relates to the protocol between the defendant and Baker as to what their plan is to try and thwart justice if they're ever arrested, this is what the defendant is making fun of to her daughter, because of course in this case what she's been arrested for is the murder of Isabella's father and the pact that the defendant and Baker have made to take their conspiracy to kill her father to their graves. Kind of gives new meaning to this piece of evidence. So again, I from the beginning have been going over with you the various types of evidence in this case, the physical evidence, the evidence through witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, direct evidence, but of course, as I've told you when I went through the law with you on last Thursday that applies to the charges and the special circumstance allegations, we went through what the evidence is, and at least some of it in this case. And I'm not going to go over it again today because I think you're all well aware by now that there are a lot of items of evidence that were presented at trial, and now perhaps you're starting to get how they all fit together to form the larger puzzle so that you're able to go back there and hopefully your jury deliberations will go very efficiently and smoothly and maybe even quickly. Again, one of the instructions that I mentioned last week deals with these that fall under this category of consciousness of guilt or evidence of consciousness of guilt. You can do it by suppressing evidence, by trying to keep it from coming out, concealing evidence. We heard a lot about that, and the destruction of evidence. And we heard an awful lot of evidence about that. So think of things, this is that I've mentioned previously, deleting the encrypted applications and therefore all the messaging related, cleaning up the computer, whispering at times when they know they're being recorded. That would be suppressing or trying to conceal. Flushing jail kites or jail letters, destruction. Destroying jail mail. Hiding letters from each other in other inmates' bunks. That could be suppression. It could also be concealing. Using other inmates' PIN numbers to make clean calls. Again, ways of trying to get around the system, to hide what you're trying to talk about. Using other inmates' names to send jail mail to each other, to and from, so that it won't be detected and identified as yours, or calling through third parties such as Howard Lynch or Baker's sister or whatever real relationship April is. Now, again, keep in mind, and I mentioned this several times last week, the standard in this case is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all possible doubt, not beyond an imaginary doubt, but it has to be based on reason and common sense. And I talked about that last week, and I think for you all, I think you are understand that and understand what you're being tasked with here. But also keep in mind when you look at all of the evidence in this case, and there is an overwhelming amount of evidence, obviously. I've been able to talk for 2.5 days, and I could probably go on, as I said, for days more. I didn't think I'd be here this long, but there is an enormous amount of evidence in this case. And we know that all of the evidence in this case was created by the defendant along with her co-conspirator, Robert Baker, as well as, to some degree, Chris Austin. And so you also have the January 22nd attempt to kill him. And we know that in this case, you got an idea of what that life, the Sementilli life, looked like prior to all of this, knowing that the defendant basically destroyed all of that. She threw it all away in order to be with Baker, even as she's in custody. She's doubling down on it, right? And she's saying, my baby, my soulmate, wait for me, we're going to be together. This is their future. This is their plan. And we also heard that when they were in the cells being recorded in the lockup, that they talked about the fact that they deserve each other, that they've earned a right to each other. And on that, I would say they are correct. So, you heard from, as I said, numerous people throughout the course of this trial, all people who the defendant lied to, took advantage of, manipulated, and or coerced. And you heard that time and time again, over and over again, with respect to everything. And you recall way back at the beginning when we were talking about the crime scene and what Detective Parshall and Verna and Castro, Efren Gutierrez, all of these detectives that went out there to try and get a sense of what went on in this particular case, that when Detective Efren Gutierrez walked through the crime scene with the defendant and Detective Parshall on their way out the following morning on January 24th of 2017, remember Detective Gutierrez said to Detective Parshall, he testified that he told him he thought the defendant was full of crap. Remember that? And it was because of her very unusual demeanor in the aftermath of her husband's murder. And it turns out that all of this comes back full circle now that you've heard all of the evidence since that crime scene and everything that the defendant and Baker created in the aftermath in trying to go back and destroy everything behind them and conceal evidence. But it turns out that Detective Gutierrez was 100% correct. And when you think about what happened in this case, the fact that so many people were deceived, including, and most of all, most importantly, her family, meaning her two daughters who thought they had parents that loved each other, that they had, as you heard, an amazing mother, and of course Fabio Sementilli, who believed that his wife was there to share his life with him, to raise their family, that he trusted her and never would in a million years have suspected anything like this would have been coming. But then you also see in this case over the course of the last 2 months how the defendant used people, used even her own daughters, like pawns, in order to get them to do things that she needed them to do, or to guilt them into feeling bad for wanting her to come home when they were afraid to be alone in the home alone where their father was murdered. And that, again, she's the one that brought us all here. I told you last week that we're all here in this courtroom because of one person, and it's because of her. She's the one who destroyed so many lives and their entire family. No one else did that. There's no one else to blame for any of that. Your job is to look at all of the evidence. That means all the witness testimony. And you can go through the evidence in any way you so choose. But there is a tremendous amount of evidence, and it's your job to go through it and to decide whether or not the evidence in this case proves the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I would say at this point, based on the overwhelming evidence of guilt that you've heard over the course of the last 2 months, that there is no doubt. And when I think about a jury trial, I think about it in terms of the fact that a trial is really a search for truth, right? We're trying to get at what really happened, who's responsible. And in this case, what you heard, and what I've talked to you about a little bit this morning, was the defendant tried to hide the truth. She, along with her ride or die, Robert Baker, they destroyed evidence, they deleted evidence, they tried to hide the planning behavior, they tried to hide the conspiracy, the fact that they were working together to bring about a common result that they both intended and wanted. That would be the death of Fabio Sementilli, so that they could have this new future together and so that they would have a way to be able to pay for this future that they wanted. Because, of course, when the defendant is offered a job opportunity by one of Fabio's friends, by Ernie, that's not what she wants. She doesn't want to have to work for it. So she wants to be able to live her life with somebody else paying for it. And so when you hear about all of the evidence that they destroyed, you have to keep in mind that these are two individuals who didn't believe that they would ever get caught. They didn't believe that there would be a jury now sitting here listening to all of these things that they thought weren't going to be captured on these recordings, that when they were whispering, somehow we would miss that, or the way that they managed to communicate to one another, it was so convoluted and complicated that we would never be able to retrieve any of that, those jail kites. And in fact, what you heard is that we were able to retrieve some of it and enough of it so that you could add it on top of everything that you have from the evidence from the crime itself, and now you layer on top of it all of their own words, their recordings, and their own words in their jail mail. But all of this was done very intentionally to prevent you from being able to learn about and to hear the truth. But as you heard, it doesn't work like that. And in this case, it didn't. And that all of this evidence of conscience of guilt is yet more evidence that you can layer on, even on top of that, of this mountain of evidence, all of it pointing to the defendant's guilt. So, very soon, this is going to be, this case, the responsibility for this is going to be turned over to you. I know you're all ready for that, and you know that your job is to be able to evaluate the evidence in this case, even though there is an enormous amount, to apply the law that Judge Cohen is going to provide you with. But in this case, you already know the truth. And you know there's a vast amount of evidence in this case, and you just have to put all of the pieces together. And I've tried to do that over the course of the last couple of days. But in this case, it's very obvious that the defendant, along with her lover, murdered Fabio Sementilli along with assistance from Christopher Austin, that the murder was committed for financial gain, as well as for other motivations, in other words, their future together, that the murder was committed by means of lying in wait, because Fabio Sementilli, in this case, was ambushed based on a secret plan or design that the defendant and her lover put into place, and that the defendant, along with Robert Baker and Christopher Austin, conspired in order to kill Fabio Sementilli on January 22nd, as well as on January 23rd of 2017, and ultimately, we all know that they were successful because their planning was so meticulous. And so I thank you for the time and attention you have shown, and I hope that your deliberations go smoothly.